Rece Davis, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Tuscaloosa.
Oh, glad to be on with you, Ryan. How are you?
I'm well. Just practice starting this week in Tuscaloosa. You can imagine the electricity is starting to build up a little bit here in T-Town.
Well, it should. I think that Alabama has a really talented team, and I think that any time that you have a question mark at the most visible position on a team, then it lends itself to some excitement, some anticipation. And, I'm glad that for Alabama fans, if this is not getting to be old hat, they should appreciate the stature, and I know that they do, that their program holds in the sport, the way that they've been so ridiculously competitive over the last few years. Ryan, I don't know if I've said this to you. Do you know how many games in the regular season in the last 7 years that Alabama has played that didn't carry some national championship significance?
I don't know.
3.
Wow.
3. They played 3 regular season games in 2010 after losing to LSU, in which they had no chance to play for the national championship. In virtually every other case, even in that year after the South Carolina loss, I believe it was 2010, basically they were in a situation in which they just won their games, they played for the national championship. And that's, I've almost found it amusing, some of the articles that I've read about the cracks in the foundation, and they're not what they were. I think it's silly. Now, look, they may lose 3 games this year, but every program in the world has seasons in which, they lose games. I'm not predicting that that'll happen. I'm just saying that's normal. It ought to be taken as a badge of honor that Alabama has reached a point where if they don't win the championship every year, then people start looking to see what's wrong with the program. It's almost ludicrous because they've been not miraculously, it's been the product of hard work and skill, but they've been in marvelous fashion really consistently in the championship race.
We go back to the history, and I'm going to take you back a few years. Joe Namath's first annual celebrity golf tournament. You were one of the people that it was invited in by the university to do a golf team, and you were there inside Bryant-Denny Stadium. It was prior to sort of this era of Alabama football, and you look around the room and you see all these icons, you see all these Joe Namaths of the world and the Cornelius Bennett's and all the legendary players. But take that into consideration. With what you just said, ESPN College Game Day it'll be the 24th appearance since 2007 that ESPN College Game Day has made an appearance at an Alabama game. It leads the country by a good margin as far as college football programs. 7 consecutive years were their number 1. Is the brand of the University of Alabama ever been higher, in your opinion?
No. And I imagine I've got some pushback from some people. I wrote an essay for the aftermath of the 2012 National Championship game, in which I declared that I believe that this was the greatest era of Alabama football for a number of, and so it has to be punctuated by championships, and it has been. But I think that because of the era in which we live, and with it being difficult to repeat, with not keeping players all 4 years, even that 1 year difference, I think, makes a huge difference on your roster. And that's great. I have no issues with that. I'm not criticizing that, just for the record. But I think that this era is the grandest of Alabama football. I think it's more competitive than it was in the 60s and the 70s. And, it's hard to compare because I say that I'm not trying to say that the Bryant era wasn't spectacular. It certainly was. But then, the Frank Thomas era wasn't a great one, or the Wallace Wade era. All of them in their own way, and every school has those things as well. But not every school, but every elite school. Notre Dame has eras in which it was proud you can compare a lose era to Eric Parsegians and to Frank Leahy's, to Luke Rockney's, and all of that, and debate which one was the best. In my judgment, I believe that because of the difficulties of winning, because you have fewer scholarships than you did back in the day, because it's more of a level playing field in terms of exposure, and you have to win to get your exposure. I think this is the best one. If things had gone Alabama's way at either 13 or 14 and they'd won another championship, I think it would be, I'm not even sure there would be a debate about it, but that's a pretty high standard that they've established over the last few years.
We're talking to Rece Davis right now, ESPN College Game Day host, a big part of college football, making the transition this year to be the main host. Chris Fowler moving to some other responsibilities there at ESPN. We're talking to Rece Davis inside the game here in Tuscaloosa. When I look at Alabama, Nick Saban throughout this offseason has talked about reestablishing the identity of some of those national championship teams. In the current day of college football, can you go back to not a smash mouth, but maybe a run-first oriented offense and win a national title?
Yes, it's what's best for your team in its personality, and whatever Nick believes that identity should be, whether it means running a little more or just being a little tougher along the line of scrimmage, then yeah, you can do that for sure. I didn't think it was just running the ball. I thought it was more an attitude and a relentless will to compete that I think they're trying to get to now, or get back to. Now, when you say things like that, it makes it sound like that the 2014 team didn't compete. Well, they most certainly did. Things might not have ended the way they wanted them to, but I think that you have to look for really small things in areas to improve when you've been as successful as Alabama has been. And I think that my impression from talking to him was that it wasn't just running the ball. It was getting back to that relentless, competitive nature in which you were worried far less about the outcome of the game and far more about the outcome of the play, and make sure that the outcome of the play went in your favor and the rest of the stuff would take care of itself.
Rece, let me ask you about the SEC as a whole. Do you see the strength of this league the way that we're projecting it now with the early rankings of this team, all these teams that are very competitive in the SEC West? Do you see it the same way?
Well, I certainly think that the SEC is very competitive, particularly in the West, and I think there are potentially a lot of outstanding teams. For the second straight year, just as I believe this last year, I don't think there's very much of a gap, if any, between the SEC and some of the other conferences. I didn't think there was much of a gap last year between the SEC and the Pac-12 as a whole, for instance, and I would think that the same is pretty much true in my judgment this year between the SEC West and the Pac-12 South. And in this particular case, I think the Pac-12 North, say, Oregon and Stanford, or Oregon particularly, I'm still having a little bit of wait and see on Stanford, but I'm not sure that there are nationally elite teams potentially in that division, and the same would be true, say, for Georgia in the SEC East. Doesn't mean there aren't good teams. I'm just talking nationally elite teams and national championship contending teams. So I think there's not much of a gap between those two conferences, and as a subset to that, there are teams in the Big 12 who can beat anybody, and everybody, including Alabama, including Georgia, or whoever else you like in the SEC, all of them are chasing Ohio State. Ohio State's the best team. They have the best combination of talent and experience, at the key position. So in this particular case, the SEC might not be chasing the Big Ten as a whole, but SEC teams that want to win a championship are chasing a Big Ten team in Ohio State.
How good does Auburn need to be on the defensive side of the football to be an elite team?
I think, certainly better than it was last year. They're going to score. I've told this story a couple of times recently, and I will take great care to make sure that people realize that I was only joking a little bit, and that I, in no way, shape, form, or fashion, want to take a swipe at Nick Marshall. But I sort of jokingly said to Gus and a couple of the Auburn people after watching practice last year before the season, you sure you guys are playing the right guy at quarterback? Because, I thought Jeremy Johnson looked phenomenal. And of all of the teams, and there are 9 of them in the coach's top 25 this year that will be starting new quarterbacks, I would say out of all of those 9, and, I certainly can't guarantee anything, but my judgment, the one that I have zero question about how the quarterback will perform is Auburn. I think he's going to be terrific. And as big a fan of Dak Prescott as I am, both as a player and as a person, I think that the number of wins will probably factor on Jeremy's side. If there's anybody else in the league that's going to be the first team All-SEC quarterback other than Dak, I would say Jeremy Johnson's got a great shot to do that. But the question you asked me was about defense. So I don't think the defense has to be to the level of 2011 Alabama by any stretch of the imagination. But if they're just pretty good, they're certainly going to have a great season because I think they're going to be really good on offense. Now, with all of the praise I've heaped on Johnson, having said that, the one thing that Nick Marshall did was bring a unique escapability and blinding speed to the quarterback position that I think made defenses nervous. I think that while they'll still have to deal with the tempo, I think that they won't have that unique X factor that scared defenses out of their mind with Nick Marshall at quarterback, because if you I won't even say misread one play. If you didn't play it perfectly and you let him escape, then he could be gone in a heartbeat. They won't have that, but Auburn will have, I think, somebody who will be a more efficient, more dangerous, more accurate passer over the long haul.
Let me work our way to Wisconsin. Be the final question. We're talking to Rece Davis right now, the host of ESPN College Game Day. The announcement came down earlier today from ESPN that Alabama and Wisconsin would be the first featured game out of the gate for ESPN College Game Day. Rece, break down the Wisconsin-Alabama game. If you've started sort of taking looks at that game, it's no doubt one that gets our attention here in Tuscaloosa, top 20 matchup in Arlington or Fort Worth, Texas.
Well, Wisconsin is always going to be able to run the ball, and they're going to be relentless in their attempts to do so. And I know people say, well, they've got a new coach. They've actually got a coach of Paul Chris, who is one of my favorite guys to be around in coaching, who understands Wisconsin mentality. Gary Anderson, who just left there, is a terrific coach as well. But I think Paul is the perfect fit for Wisconsin. And because of that, I think that the transition period is going to be lessened because he understands the culture and the program and the kids who are in that program. And you're not just going to roll in and replace Melvin Gordon, even though Corey Clement's a terrific back. But I think that Wisconsin is replacing some guys on defense that would certainly work in Alabama's favor, playing them in the first game. I think that Joel Stavi has not established himself as a consistent passer, so I would think that Alabama would make him prove that he has improved in that area, and therefore would load up to stop the running game. But I will say this: Wisconsin seen teams do that before. Everybody knows Wisconsin's going to run, and too many teams have not been able to do anything about it. So they are an old school, hard hitting, smash mouth, if you will, football team who is going to run and continue to run, and they don't care that you know that they're going to run. They're going to continue to do it. They're not going to try to get cute and beat you. But I think Paul is really good at identifying weaknesses. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. He was the coach of Pittsburgh last year, and I did their Thursday night game against Virginia Tech. And the one thing that they identified, even with James Conner, who's a terrific back for Pitt, even with him, they identified that they felt like Virginia Tech would have difficulty with the quarterback run. So their quarterback, Chad Boydick, he's a decent runner. He's certainly no Nick Marshall, but he's a good runner. He's not Nick Marshall or Blake Sims or anything like that in terms of being explosive. But they felt like they could run the quarterback, so they did enough to the tune that they ended up winning the game. They beat the team that beat Ohio State. So Paul, even though they're going to be dedicated to running their tailback, it doesn't mean they're just going to run their tailback. Paul's a really sharp offensive guy who will try to seize upon a weakness if he sees it, or seize upon an advantageous matchup. And look, Alabama is a better team than Wisconsin, but there are questions for Alabama quarterback play, and Wisconsin is not a team that's going to roll over for anybody. So I certainly believe that Alabama's a better team going in, but I don't believe that because of their winning that they've established over the last few years. Under Brett Bielema the first, then under Gary Anderson for a couple of years, and now with Ball coming back, I don't think they're going to be intimidated by the side of Alabama coming onto the field or fearing that they can't run against them. They're going to make Alabama prove that they can stop them, and I would imagine that Alabama is going to try to make Wisconsin prove that it can complete a forward pass effectively, and that should make for a game that if you like it physical, I think that this would be the game for you on the first Saturday